My name is Carrie Anton. I'm the coordinator of accessibility services, and we have the privilege to have with us today Deanna Finilak, who is a learning strategist and a fantastic person in my mind. And we've had really great sessions until today, and so I'm for sure have great hopes for learning a lot today myself. Today we're going to be talking about note taking. And I know from my time as a student, I'm one of those people that highlights every single thing and then goes back and asks myself why. So I'm hoping to get a lot out of this session today too. So welcome all of you, and welcome Deanna. Take it away, my friend.
Great, thank you. I'm so excited to be back. Putting together this presentation really had me thinking again about how all of the strategies are so interrelated. So we're going to talk about note-taking in terms of structure and form, but we're also going to build on it next week when we're talking about studying, and then the week after when we talk about reading. So they're all going to kind of build in together, and I'm hoping to be able to model some of the strategies in a little bit more depth then. But for those of you that are new or just joining us today, my name is Deanna Fidelic, and I don't want to reintroduce myself to be redundant for everybody, but I'm excited to be here and to share information that I've learned throughout my years in post-secondary, as a student, as an educator, as a person, as a mom, as someone who has a learning disability. And so I'm really excited to share. So we're going to talk about note-taking strategies today. And as I said, we're going to build on those when we talk about test prep and performance, because spoiler alert, test prep and performance is really all about the prep. And the prep starts when you're learning the material, which links back to note taking, and also reading strategies, which probably could have been placed as session 4, because you have to have the strong reading strategies before you're extracting the material to study for the exams, et cetera, et cetera. It's like this interweb, right? But we'll talk about it and kind of go from there. As with all of the other sessions, please feel free to chat, ask questions, raise your hand, do whatever you need to do to get my attention. I don't want to feel like I'm talking to you. I do like hearing my own voice. If I had a microphone, it would be fantastic and fun, but I also want to make sure that you're engaged and that I'm able to tailor to specifically for you, right? So if there's any questions you have, please do not hesitate. If you're apprehensive about interrupting me, don't be, but you still might be. We'll have some time at the end as well for questions, okay? And then as always, you're welcome to email me and ask your questions too. So before we talk about get into some of the specific note-taking strategies, I just want to give you a bit of an overview of the structure of today's session. So we're going to talk about why we take notes. We're going to review the forgetting curve. If you're unfamiliar with it, talk about the great note-taking debate. So some of the not really myths, but there's a big debate going on, or there has been for years in academia about, if we should be taking notes by hand or by computer, what's going to be better for retention and such. And then I'll give you a little glimpse into some note-taking systems. I'm so sorry, that's my dog in the background. So hopefully my son figures out what's happening. I apologize, everyone. So we're going to talk about some note-taking systems. And then we're going to pair those note-taking systems with note-taking apps and some assistive technology. And then we're going to frame that all up with some goal setting and some reflection, okay? So to start with why we take notes, people with photographic memories, they can remember everything word for word from a lecture or a book, or even if they're just auditory learners. If they hear information, it can really stick with some people. The rest of us, those don't always happen, and we can benefit from taking those notes. So note-taking is a very natural and quite effective method of learning material. It's where we write down not only the most important parts of a lesson or a reading or a lecture to review later, but it also engages us in the moment while we're learning. So the value that we receive from note-taking is only as good as the notes themselves. And we look at our first picture. which is the picture from my son's science notes this year. And I kept this kind of as a proud parent, but like not telling him that. This is what he was taking for notes in science class, and his teacher had called home, and it was like a big deal. Um, and so I talked to him about it, and I said, "Why are you like, what's going on?" And he said, "Like, I don't know what to take. She tells us to take notes, but I don't know what to write down." And he's like, "And I can hear all the information, and I remember it, and he's like doing great in school and whatever." Anyways, brought us back into the strategy of, the conversation of sometimes we can remember all the information, but we have to develop that strategy. For those that can't see the screen, it's an Oilers roster. My son's a huge Oilers fan, and he was making a roster if he were the Oilers coach. And anyways, nothing science related at all, but we need to start practicing those strategies as we're going in some of those courses where, we don't necessarily feel we need to take notes, because we're not always going to be able to remember the information. So, in fact, actually, it's almost impossible to remember everything that you read or even like hear from your lectures. I think they say like we forget like 33% of what we don't review within 24 hours. So that's why we encourage people to take notes. But much like Carrie kind of did with the intro about the highlighter, you got to know what to take and you got to know what to do. And so some of the systems that we're going to talk about today are like strategies that serve as scaffolds that can really help you achieve that. Okay. And so we'll talk about that. Okay. So this brings us to the forgetting curve. Has anybody heard about the forgetting curve before? I know I asked the question and you're probably not going to put up your hand, or maybe tell me if you have. I don't know. So yeah, like a lot of people that I was talking to about this that work in the area with me, I mean, we all know about it, but like a lot of the students that I've been working with don't know about the forgetting curve. So the forgetting curve, just in a nutshell, is, coined by a German psychologist, Hermann Ebbinghaus. He wanted to understand more about why we forget things and how to prevent forgetting information. So his research really kind of focused on the area of memory and forgetfulness. And he produced this forgetting curve, which is this visual representation of the way that the information learned fades over time. So there's a couple things that he gathered from his research. Some of it we're going to be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And it's that memory fades over time. If we learn something new, but then make no attempt to relearn that information, we'll remember less and less of it as the hours and days and weeks go by, right? So the other thing he found is that the biggest drop in retention happens soon after the learning occurs. So for those of you that can see the visual, it's a graph here that says approximately 60% of information is forgotten only after about 9 hours. And so if you don't kind of organize and review your lecture notes afterwards, the material, you're going to kind of slowly start to forget that information. And I think it's like 80% you're going to forget if you don't review in like a month or something. So, yeah, so without reviewing or reinforcing our learning, our ability to remember and retain this information, it really does plummet. So even today, like you can leave the session and be like, oh yeah, I've got all these good ideas. If you're not doing something to review that information afterwards, then you're gonna forget about it. And so we naturally do these things all the time. I mean, we're making grocery lists, we're making to-do lists, we're writing down tasks or chores for our kids to complete after school so they remember, kind of serves as the reminder. This is what note taking does, kind of in just a bit more of an elaborate form. So he also discovered that it's easier to remember things that have meaning. We know this. I'm a teacher. As a teacher, only way I could remember kids' names was to like make some sort of connection between the kid and their name. And so it could be like some other rhyming name. It could be some funny story, or it could be something they say. And so, I can't think of one offhand, but there would be a kid. I'll give an example. My son Ethan, when I'm learning his name, I might be like, oh, okay, I don't have an example for this, guys. You know what I mean. Making that connection. Jenny, I did with a girl, Jenny, that I had probably about 8 years ago in a school. And Jenny was like a really common name when I grew up in the 80s. And so I was like, oh, Jenny, like I had a friend named Jenny. And then I'm making that connection. I never forgot Jenny's name because I was able to make that connection. So we need to do that with the information that we're learning in our courses. So if we're listening, to a video or a presentation or a talk on a subject that we really don't understand or have little interest in, we'll likely forget it faster. Well, probably also because we weren't engaged. But then in a subject that you found really interesting, engaging, or exciting. Now, we can't always take courses that are interesting and engaging or exciting. For the most part, we choose stuff that's an area of interest, but there's still going to be some courses that we're not going to be as interested in. Um, for me, that was my religion courses. When I went to Concordia before it was when it was a private Lutheran college, you had to take a mandatory religion class. And so for me, I had to find ways to like get my brain engaged. I could say the same thing about a French class that I had to take. An intro French class wasn't my jam, but I had to find ways to make that connection in order for me to remember that material. There's lots of memory strategies that we can use. We're going to talk about those next week to remember information. But taking the notes is allowing us to make meaning and making some connections throughout the notes. Now, the other thing that he found is that how we feel affects, oh, I'm skipping one. The way something is presented impacts our learning as well. So we can't always control how something is presented to us. Be great if we could. But what we can do is we can seek out resources and preferred methods of learning. We can control that. So, oftentimes when I'm working with students that it's not as much with students from AU, but students that are in in-person lectures or online lectures where there's like a face-to-face live component or even a recorded component. Sometimes students will say like, I can't understand the prof. Like he's got a really thick accent or he talks really fast. And so then sometimes the conversation comes down to, we can't change that. There's some things we can put in place in terms of like our note-taking scaffolds or getting notes from a peer or doing some like peer group work. But one of the things that you can do is utilize other resources to gain the knowledge. YouTube is a total gift to education for that way. As long as you're watching, videos that are from like a reputable source. But we have all this access to all the information that gone are the days of like the prof is the only form of information or the encyclopedia at the library. So we have like this big realm. And so it's really just about us grabbing different tools, right, from different places when we need it. So the other thing is that how we feel affects how well we remember information as well. So there's a huge physiological factors involved, such as our sleep, our stress, even where we're at psychologically. All of this plays a super significant role in how well we're going to remember information. And that's why some students say to me, I was taking courses last year and I was just or last term, everything was just fine. But this year, for some reason, I just can't remember information. Well, then we start breaking down what's happening in your life right now in the moment. We're at the end of a pandemic. Life changed drastically. And I know we're saying this all the time. And how long can we say, like, oh, it's the pandemic? But that's big. If you're going through like a separation or if there's like family tension or, if you've got any type of relational stuff. And we all do, it happens. If you're working two jobs to make ends meet and you're parenting kids and you're playing on a soccer team and you've got all this stuff that's like conflicting and not conflicting, but like taking your attention into so many different directions, you're going to forget information because there's only so much you can hold in that space for so long. And so what do we do? Do we just like keep forgetting information or do we just stop that's not an option, right? Like for some people, it's not an option to give up something off your plate. And so we have to put scaffolds in place that are going to help us. Um, and so the focus today in terms of the note taking is on those scaffolds. Okay. And so when I'm talking about a scaffold, I'm meaning a tool or a resource or a service that can help bridge the gap as we're trying to learn material. Scaffolds that we used all the time as kids growing up in math in like kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2 would have been manipulatives. So those blocks, or, as we got older, it would have been number lines or a multiplication table. Or for language arts, learning to write a paragraph. Teachers use scaffolds to do that. We're going to scaffold information. When it comes to your learning, even in post-secondary, we need to use scaffolds. Okay. I'm going to poke you for a minute here, mainly because I need a sip of tea. Can anybody give a suggestion or just a little comment on a scaffold that you use to aid your memory? Anyone? Anyone?
Oh, Deanna, did you already mention that you're using sort of an acronym? Because that's what I usually do. I form usually from, if there's a theory with particular steps, I take the first letter and I make a word like letter, and then kind of memorize for each letter. And then all I have to do is memorize that particular acronym.
Totally. So never eat soggy wieners, north, east, southwest, right? So an acronym is a great memory strategy in order to remember information. It's a great example. Thank you. In our notes, it's okay to make those connections. And that's what we're going to talk about. Yeah, mnemonics are really good too. That's what we're going to talk about making those connections. And we're going to build on this next week when we talk about some of the really good study strategies that I like to use. And I like to encourage students to use as well. So that's great. Thank you. Okay. So let's talk about the great note-taking debate, because I mean, Carrie, I don't know if you guys were talking about this at AU, but we in my office were talking about this a lot over the years. This has been a conversation for a long time, especially in post-secondary, because when I went to post-secondary, and I'm not even that old, I don't think, you didn't have laptops in the classroom. It was like not a thing. I don't The prof rarely ever had a laptop in the classroom. You were lucky if you had a classroom with even a projector. So it just wasn't a thing. And then, when I started teaching in post-secondary, now it's a totally different experience in in-person classes. It's a totally different experience. Everyone's there, like they're all typing, and when I'll be in the back of the lecture hall and I'll be watching, 'cause I'm kind of nosy, what students are doing on the computer. And some of them are like typing like crazy. And then other ones are like on Instagram and like scrolling through Reddit, and they're like super distracted and not engaged. We'll talk about that in a minute. But since computers became both common and like portable, so laptops, there's been this huge debate about note taking by hand versus digitally, or on a tablet or on a phone. I don't know how people take notes on their phone. I will never understand that, but you do you. So we know that taking notes by hand improves memory, though not significantly. It still improves memory, probably because you're having to focus more and you're actually like activating the thinking part of your brain, and you're not just passively typing. But they all have their own strengths, and perform differently in different situations. So research tells us that, using handwritten notes helps students learn information more efficiently. Short-term and long-term information retention seems to increase when people are taking notes by hand. I'm not saying that it's like black and white, like one or the other. So let's make that clear, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So there is advantages to taking handwritten notes, 100% for sure. If you are able to do it and that works for your brain, do it. It's great. So we know that it's going to aid, as I said, in the memory and the formation and the retention. Okay. I would say more the formation, because you're engaged in that active listening while you're learning the material, but also in retention afterwards if you're reviewing the material. Depending on how you're taking notes, it's going to get you to engage in kind of real-time summarizing. Some of the strategies I'm going to show you today, that's clearer than others, okay? It's easier to create diagrams and illustrations, so this is really important for like math and chemistry and all that other really smart stuff. And, for some visual learners, it can be a preferred method for them if they need to kind of have it in their own, format and ready to go. Okay, so but there's also really good advantages to taking digital notes as well. And as I said, there's distinct pros and cons for both, but we know that taking digital notes allows for like speedier documentation. It can be a more flexible or a format that we can easily tailor. You can use assistive technology, which is huge and so important for so many learners. It's faster, we can get more information down quicker. Our hand doesn't get sore. I don't want to like talk about my kid all the time, but like my kid cannot write more than a couple sentences without whining about his hand. And his printing is atrocious. It's not the end of the world because we have access to technology. But to teach him to take notes by hand is like taking a step back from what he's used to. The question is, though, is he still engaging in the material? And so that's something that you have to engage in, that critical reflection piece about your own learning. So like we said, we all know digital note taking, great way to edit and reorganize information. When I was in post-secondary for my undergrad, everything was by hand. And I would rewrite my notes so many times to make the perfect study notes. They were pretty, it had colors, it was so good. If I got towards, the bottom of the page and I like spelled something wrong, I'd have to rewrite them. Like the act of doing all that was really good for my learning. I don't know if it was the most time efficient. Um, I remember getting the hand cramp, but yeah. If you lose those notes, though, you're hooked, right? So there is definitely advantages for having, both formats for sure. So to settle this debate, there's a team of researchers, both separate teams, one at Princeton, one at UCLA. I'm sure there's a dozen others if we were to go and search the database for more articles. They decided to try and kind of settle this debate by running some, experiments, focusing on university students to see whether or not typing these notes made a significant difference or not. And they found that sure, writing notes by hand might be slightly advantageous than typing notes, but it honestly wasn't enough to write home about. So the great note-taking debate doesn't have this like dramatic conclusion. What they did find though is that it's about what you're doing when you're taking the notes that matters. So it's not about typing, it's not about handwriting, it's not if you record, it's what you're doing in your active engagement while you're taking those notes. So their suggestion is that you need to be thinking, you need to be present, you need to be engaged. The more you think, paraphrase, and process the notes that you write, the better you're going to learn the material. Okay. If you can get yourself to be mindful and not just type while you're typing notes, that's awesome. Do it. But you just need to make sure that you're being present at the moment and you're thinking about the information as you're typing it. Easier said than done, huh? The other one is to slow down. It's not about this is like less is more. This is kind of the thing. Writing more notes is not necessarily better. I cannot say the amount of times that I've worked with students on strategies when they're taking notes from their textbook readings, right? Like they're doing the course readings and they're taking their notes, and it's like paragraph on paragraph on paragraph. And then when they go to study for the exam, they're like, I don't know what to look at because I basically rewrote the textbook. Serena, you have a point though. Taking a lot of notes can serve a purpose. So Serena just said she takes a lot of notes even when she has handouts. Writing helps her stay focused on the speaker. Me too. And sometimes when I'm speaking, this is my ADHD and this is a strategy. So even today, I'm going to show you right now. If something comes into my mind while I'm speaking, I have to jot it down or I'll lose track of what I'm speaking about because my squirrel brain is taking me to that next point. This is still me writing notes. It's a different form of the process. When I'm in a meeting for my work, I need to be present. I am not present. unless I'm taking notes, especially since life became virtual. I will be the first to admit if I'm not taking the meeting minutes, I am not engaged. That is a strategy that helps me mitigate some of the barriers caused by my struggles with focus. Okay, so this is really good. Thank you for sharing that. It's more important that we're thinking about what we're writing down than writing a ton of notes. I would say the same thing for those of us that like things to be pretty. I like for things to be pretty, but you can make them pretty after. You need to get the essential information down, okay? And then, if you're not going to look at your notes as a tool afterwards, don't waste your time. I say that half-heartedly. It's still beneficial to write it down, but use that as a tool. If you like sacrifice that hand cramp to get the information in one area, use it as a tool, okay? If you're gonna type them all out and like you have it, don't go back to the textbook and retype it all out when you're gonna study. We'll talk about this next week. But like, just make sure that you're using that as a tool because you created it and it's awesome. And will help those notes become a little bit more practical for you. Okay, that's what we're gonna focus on right now. So I need to give a little bit of a disclaimer here. I didn't invent any of these methods that we are going to talk. Okay, I'm not taking any credit. I didn't cite them because you can Google them and they're going to be on there by like a million different people and they're going to show you a different way. And every single way is going to be the same and different. Okay, so I just want to make that very clear. The internet has some really valuable suggestions. Now, when I'm working with students through Learning Coach and I'm coaching them through, I've got like my go-to blends and hybrids that I'm often teaching students. So it's very rare that I'm like, oh, actually, I never have said, oh, look up the outline method. It's a fantastic. I didn't even know what the outline method was called, the outline method, but it's one of the most common methods of note taking that I did all the time in school. And it's a really effective way. So we'll talk about that in more detail. But I really want to say that there's no right format to use when taking notes, just like there's no right way of reflecting or goal setting, but there's many ways that are not effective. And there's many different structures and styles that can be used and can be made effective. Just like approaching a task one way might not work all the time. It's the same thing with note taking. You need to have multiple methods because your situation is going to be different. Maybe the instructor, again, has the accent. Maybe the course design is clearer in one class than the other. Maybe the level of language or jargon in the textbook that you have to read through and take notes on and get through is like way more complex than you're ready for. Maybe the content is just not interesting to you. So you have to have a different belt full of strategies, if you will. So remember, I again want to go back to the tool belt thing. I say this all the time, but the more tools you have in your tool belt, the more likely you will be able to fix your fence, unplug a drain, assemble furniture, or at least look like you know what you're doing. Fake it, my friends. We're going to fake it until we make it, okay? And we're going to try. And if it's not working, we're going to try again. And then we're going to find something else. And then we're going to get suggestions from a friend. If it's still not working, we're going to dig, okay? And we're going to find a system that's going to work. Now, I also want to say that there isn't one system that I have ever used. You use a blend of them. And this is where you kind of de-anify it, make it your own, okay? You're going to do something that's going to work for you. Let's talk about, first of all, before I go on, does anyone have any questions about this? Okay. What is that? That show, the movie, it's like Bueller? Anyone? I don't actually remember what the quote is. I shouldn't have quoted it. But anyways, okay. So here we go. The outline method, most popular note-taking method. It lets you organize all of your information in a structured form. It can help you save time when you're going back afterwards to review information. This method kind of requires you to structure your notes in the form of an outline by using bullet points to represent different topics, subtopics, etc., etc. I like using this method for textbook readings For me, I always use the chapter headings and the other text features, so the headings and the subheadings, to structure the notes that I would be taking if I was reading a textbook, which I would be in combination with a highlighting strategy, which we'll talk about in session number 5. See how they all blend? And so this is the one that I like the most. And when I'm coaching students, particularly at AU, to take notes from their textbook readings, this is the method that I'm often coaching them on, okay, to kind of extract that information. It has to be paired with effective reading strategies. We'll get here, and I promise it will all come together. And if it doesn't, send me an email and we'll connect, okay? So there's lots of advantages to this. You can do it on paper, you can do it digitally. The advantage is that it highlights the information nice and clear. It allows you to focus. Well, that's the act of note taking. It's encouraging you to focus. Because it's like in a nice organized fashion, it's kind of easier to kind of edit in and out. And it's just nice and clear. It might not be as helpful for like math or like chemistry or something where you have to like have formulas and charts. Though that's where you could do a blend where you're not just doing the outline method, you're also drawing and making arrows, and you'll see in a minute what I mean, okay? So this is one that's really good. This is a structure that can also be really good when you're in class, like in a live lecture. If you're taking a video, maybe it's harder because you have to have clear like headings and topics, right? Or you don't have to, but in theory, like that's the format, right? So you'd have the heading and then you put some points. So I know for me, if I was having to watch a video and I wanted to take notes on the video, this isn't going to be the method that I'm going to use, because I'm like, if I'm structure, I need structure. And if they're not giving me the headings or the proper outline, then I don't have structure. So here's another method. This is the charting method. It's kind of like pros and cons list, or like a nurse would chart information at the hospital, I think. Never been a nurse, but so this is really good for, the first thing that comes to mind for me is for like study sessions. So after you've participated in learning the material. So this would be a good method if after you've gone through the textbook and you've got your chapter notes, if you needed to compare theories. So in psychology all the time, if you wanted to compare, you know, Erikson from Piaget, from whoever else, it's really good to kind of have it in a structured chart. If you have, it's good if you have, oh, Sheena, it's not black for me. Can everybody see? Sorry, Sheena's comment popped up. Okay, you can see it, Tanya. Sheena, you're welcome to pop out. Okay, Sheena, maybe pop out and come back in. See if it changes it for you. Okay, so for this charting method, information's organized in several columns, similar to like a table or a spreadsheet. And it actually could be made as in a table or a spreadsheet. Each column is going to represent like a unique category, which makes the rows easily comparable. It's great to use during that active learning stage. So after you've previewed the material, so that's like your quick and dirty textbook read. I know this is out of order, guys. We're going to talk about this in week 5, the reading part. But when you're drawing the connections back between concepts and theories and determining how everything fits together. So this one example on here, got off the internet, guys. It has the method of note-taking. So, you know, what's the method? Well, we've got the outline. What's the description? When would you use it? What are the pros? What are the cons, right? So you can kind of do this. I do this when I'm vacation planning. This is the resort. Where do I want to go? What are the pros? What are the cons? So this would also be a really good resource if you're prepping for like an open book exam. We'll talk about this next week, but like it could be the quick at a glance recall sheet. So, you know, on an open book exam, you can prep and you can have that there and you could find information nice and quick. And I think it's just really good for like putting down really heavy information. This method is really good if you're having to collect different research for a research paper. And you want to get down the main points. With this method, it's going to be really important to write in point form. We don't want full sentences. We definitely do not want paragraphs for the most part. And the other thing that's really important is that you're putting it in your own words. Now, I have a learning disability in reading, and one of the biggest mistakes I made in high school and in post-secondary before I figured this all out was if I didn't understand a word, like a big grown-up word, I would write it down, that word. And then when I was studying, I would just try and remember the word, but it had no meaning to me because I didn't know what it meant. I could barely say it. So my tip for that is to always put it in your own words. So come up with another word that means the same thing, and then put the big jargony word in brackets, okay? Um, so yeah, this is the charting method, and it can have a lot of good things to it. We see charting method occurring in textbooks in the form of tables when they're highlighting information. We call this a text feature in a textbook as well. So that's really important. Okay, this mind map, more my jam. Okay, mind mapping. We've all seen mind mapping. This is like the grade 8 brainstorm on the board where your teacher's like putting the bubbles and you're brainstorming together. At least that was my experience. If you're in a lecture or, we're in watching a video or like even reading in the text, whatever, the mind mapping content can work best when you're just trying to figure stuff out. I think automatically of social studies and history and being able to put like, World War I here, World War II here, and then just kind of like connecting everything. You can divide them into branches. It can help you establish some relationships between topics. It can be messy. It can be neat. So for this method, you're going to start with writing like the main topic at the top or at the middle of the map, depending on how your brain works, and then dividing it into subtopics as you go. This can be a little bit tricky, again, if you're the person that needs more structure and more form. Yeah. So it's good for visual learners. And again, it's really good for making connections. So I think of mind mapping again, I bring stuff always back to psychology, but when I'm thinking of psychological theories, being able to like chart it out on a big paper. And I often have students that I'm working with, particularly in the psychology field, and they're like, oh, Deanna, like, I have a hard time remembering all the steps and which theorist belongs to which theory. And first thing I say to them is there's two things you need to do. Okay. Reading it in the textbook, you're going to read it and you're going to like learn about the person in isolation when you're reading that section. So maybe Erik Erikson, you're learning about him in that one section. But when you go on to another section, another theorist, you can like mix up who's with who and what information goes. So there, do a mind map. You can create the mind map as you're learning the material. So you can be taking your notes perhaps in the outline method, the first method we talked about. But then while you're doing it, you can actively be making a mind map or using sticky notes 100% on the wall. That's how I used to do the school timetable when I was a principal, to decide which teachers were teaching where. But the other thing that you can do, ready for it? It's revolutionary. Look on the internet. The internet, for sure. Especially when it comes to something like psychological theories. There's going to be some keen grad student that did it as a project. There is someone out there that has some sort of TikTok, blog, something where they're just reposting their notes. And this is a real thing on Instagram right now. We've got university students having full channels, if they even call channels, I don't know, where they're like literally posting up their pretty notes and telling how they made their notes. It's like a big thing. I may or may not enjoy watching them, but you can find all of that. So that is going to help you make that connection, then do it. So again, it's grabbing those resources and putting it into the note taking. You can do a blend of these approaches, and I definitely recommend it. Now you'll notice under the picture of one of the mind maps that I stole off the internet, that there's a link or a web address to MindMap. There's tons of them where you can like go online and look them up, and you can use their free resource or pay for it if you want. Inspiration is one that has been around forever for a reason. Some people find it really overwhelming. Some people really like it. You do you. Okay. So that's mind mapping. Mind mapping is fantastic. Fantastic. I use mind mapping all the time when I'm trying to explain a concept to students. Okay, the boxing method is like mind mapping, but in boxes. And so it's like the same thing, except for it's in box form. And you know, you can organize it that way if your brain's going to work better that way. Um, and, you know, if you did it digitally, you can move stuff around, you can copy and paste, you can let it kind of evolve without rewriting it if that's what's going to work for you. GoodNotes is another app that allows you to use the boxing method. And so that's another one that you could try. And again, a blend is going to be really important. Flow notes. So flow notes is really good for people who don't like to follow rules, which is me sometimes, but my brain likes the structure of rules. It's really good for people who want to engage kind of in the moment. And you know, like if you're wanting to like be a little bit free thinking about it and just kind of let your hand flow, let it come out, let it pour onto the page. When I'm saying that like I need to focus in a meeting, if I'm not picked to be like the helper of the day taking the minutes, then I do flow notes myself on my paper. This is like me doodling, but I'm not just like doodling. I'm doodling the information that I need to be listening to. And so this is like, you know, a really good one that can help you kind of focus in. It's great for learning in the moment, but it's not very reliable for making sure you have all the information afterwards. And you're going to kind of have to redo it to make some effective study notes typically. If you're like really artistic and, you know, you can draw fast and stuff, it could be really good for you. And so it's going to just really kind of get you to capture like main ideas rather than like verbatim information, which can be really good. If you're like a type it all down and write everything out and that's not working for you, maybe just switch it up, maybe give this a go. No, I think this one I found on like an Apple site, but there's like Flow Sketch app or something. Again, they're all over the place on the internet. It can be overwhelming. You can really procrastinate by looking for different note-taking systems if that's what you need to be doing. But there's flow notes for sure. I'm sure we are all familiar with bullet journaling. I have many students that do bullet journaling not really well in terms of like organizing yourself. I haven't seen a student do it really well, but that's because if they're doing it really well, they're probably not coming to me. But I'm not suggesting bullet journaling is the most effective or efficient form of organizing yourself, but it can be really good while taking notes. Especially if you're artistic and visual and you like to doodle or draw, it can be really good for you. So the bullet journal kind of has no rules. It's just allowing you to put information down in one kind of spot. It's kind of like the flow notes. Typically with bullet journaling, you know, there's a little bit of structure of the dots on the page and they're able to kind of like draw it out. It can be difficult to take notes quickly. If you write it down and you wrote something wrong down, it can be annoying. It can make it not be pretty. That might be important to you. But it's a really good way of reviewing information afterwards. So next week, we're going to talk about my most favorite strategy ever. And I know I say this about a lot of strategies, but this one is, it's concept page, which is like a nice way of not calling it a cheat sheet. We'll talk about that next week. But I kind of adapt that from bullet journaling. So you want to make stuff visual so you can like recall the information when you're on writing the exam. We'll talk about the visualization piece next week. Spoiler alert. But yeah, so bullet journaling can be really good. It's super hip and trendy, or it was a couple years ago. They got tons of them on Amazon for like super cheap, dollar store, anywhere you want, but it could be kind of fun. But once again, I want to say it's not for organizing yourself. Even though it might work for some people, I haven't seen it work effectively. Yeah, so if you learn by rewriting information or are a visual learner, this might be your strategy for sure. Okay. I typically recommend pairing it with other ones though. Okay. Cornell method. Has anyone heard of this one? Not gonna lie, I hadn't. Okay, Selena has. This was brand new to me when I did my Google search 2 weeks ago. So this they're saying is really good for lecture and readings, and I could see how this would be. Yeah, Lisa, I struggle with it too. This is not how my brain will work, but I'm going to give you the method Selena uses it in conjunction with others. Good, that's awesome. For me, it's too restrictive to have the page divided, but in essence, it's a way of dividing up your notes if you're looking kind of to get the most out of your review time. We're dividing it. Oh, Kurzweil has a tool built right in for this. Okay. In this method, you're going to divide your paper into, in essence, 3 sections. We've got the main notes kind of in the middle there. On the left, you have the recall keywords or questions, and then you have like this summary section in the bottom. Now, in theory, I think this can be a really effective method because it's forcing you to engage. It's focusing you to be in the moment and focused, right? You might get distracted by the rigid structure of it. But so the notes are basically for your notes in class. And you can do that however you want. I think for me, the most logical way would be kind of the outline method, maybe, I would think. I would worry that you would have way too many notes and so much extra space on the other side. So you're probably going to have a lot of paper to kind of go through. The smaller column on the left side is for comments or questions or even hints about the actual notes. They're calling it the recall section or the Q section, depending upon what source you're looking at. And you can do this, they're saying to do this either directly after class or even during the lecture. So, I mean, we're not in lectures at AU as often, but this would be great for a video, I think. This could even, I could see how this could work for a textbook reading as well. Yeah, so this is just going to put like, any hints and stuff. You can draw pictures or mind map it with it for sure. Yeah, you can do whatever. You do you. And then the other thing is that it's prompting you to do a summary afterwards, which is causing you to put it in your own words, which is causing you to realize what you're not actually understanding and you're writing down just because it was a big word and you think it's going to be on the test, which it likely would be. So it's really prompting you to do all those pieces. Selena, your hand is up. I just noticed. No? Okay, well, interrupt me, Selena, if you want to, if you had a question here. Yeah, so this is the Cornell method. There are so many videos about it on the internet, like on YouTube, so many. I went down a rabbit hole, fascinated by it. So many. There's even like Google, like teachers are making even like a template on Google for it and using it with their students. I asked my son what the scaffold was. This is just a couple days ago when we were all sick with COVID and had a lot of quality time together. I was like, hey, remember when you wrote like remember that science class where you got sent home with the Oilers, notes or whatever? What was the scaffold your teacher gave you to write notes? And he's like, what's a scaffold? I said, well, what did you have to do for writing notes? And he's like, I don't know. She just talks and tells us to write the notes, but he doesn't know what to write, right? So maybe one of these scaffolds would be helpful. SQ4R is another one. We're all probably used to the SQ3R, but the internet added a 4th R, and they all make sense. Now, this is just going to be an acronym to remember the steps. Okay, so this could be really good for extracting information. Again, for some people, it could be limiting. If you are one that's prone to like getting kind of like writer's block, or like you struggle with recall or extracting information and getting it out into words, it could be difficult. But the premise is that you need to survey the reading material first. We'll go over all of this in session 5 again, but differently. So you need to survey all of the reading first, or the notes, like the lecture notes if you were in a live lecture. And this is where you're going to write down all of the major headings and the subheadings and the topics, et cetera, et cetera. And then you're going to form questions based off of that you want to have answered. And I will show you this, I promise, for the reading part, because I have like killer strategies for them. As someone who has a reading disability, it's how I survive. And then it's going to get you to read. So that's the R. So now you're going to actually read the text. So we've already surveyed, then we've made questions, and now we're actually going to read and answer the questions. Just like you did in like grade 9 science when they gave you the back of the textbook. You just answered the questions. You read the textbook enough to find the answers, and that was it. Smart, brilliant. They taught us something. And then you're going to recite. So that's where you're going to write down the major ideas, take the notes, answer the questions, and then you're going to reevaluate it. Okay, so this one I'm not going to go into too much detail because I'm mindful of time, but also we're going to go over this in a more in depth when we're doing the reading. Okay, and I'll model it for you. Okay, this was my jam, writing on slides. This is how Deanna Fidelik got through her undergrad. Grad school, we had computers, it was a different jam, but this is how I got through. So I printed off. No, we didn't print off because instructors didn't post. We had to buy a course pack from the University of Alberta. Anybody remember this? Anyone that works at AU that remembers this when you went to university, or someone that has a previous schooling? You had to go to the bookstore and you had to buy the course pack, and it was basically poorly photocopied notes or readings. It was brutal. Anyways, you would get the notes and you would print them off and you would bring them to class and you would write on them. Legit, this is how it happened. And it was awesome and it was amazing. And you would engage with the material by highlighting important information, drawing boxes, making arrows. It was so much fun. And you didn't worry about writing down everything that they said because it wasn't an option. We didn't know that that was a thing. Unfortunately, for some students that needed that, they weren't able to record lectures. Like it just wasn't a thing. So I mean, it's kind of, some people would say this is like note-taking for lazy people. I think that's insulting. But like, it's just so good and it's so effective. Can you tell it's one of my favorite? So, nowadays, I mean, if you're having, like if you have to go to a presentation, oftentimes you have the slides ahead of time. So if you wanted, you have these slides, you could be writing on the slides as I'm talking, right? All of that is definitely a fantastic thing to do. It is, it's working smarter, not harder. It has nothing to do about lazy. Actually, I despise that word lazy because it's not fair. Okay. We do well when we have the tools and the resources to do well, and the belief that we can do. Yeah, this one's self-explanatory. I'm not going to go over it anymore. Okay. Note-taking apps and assistive technology. Now, here's the thing. I want to caution in this section. I am not an expert in assistive technology. I'm a user of assistive technology for things that I need for myself. I support students with using assistive technology. I sometimes recommend assistive technology I'm familiar with. I will, in strategy sessions with students, teach them how to use their assistive technology when they're learning. And that's the big thing that we need to remember, okay? There's all of these flashy tools. There are all of these flashy forms of assistive technology. Sometimes we get lost in wanting to use the technology just to use the technology. Technology is fantastic. We need to know how to learn the material. We need to use the technology as the tool to gain us access to that material. So the trick is to find the tool that's going to work for you and then to go with it. We typically, yeah, Lisa's right. In her experience, it's better to understand the concepts, then add it into the technology. So that's right, for sure. If you're using, for example, I'm going to connect it to reading because that's my area. If you are using text-to-speech reading software, you still have to know strategies to engage with that material. Simply listening to it, it's like an audiobook. Simply listening to an audiobook, unless you have the strategies to engage yourself, is not going to be any more effective. Well, maybe a little bit more effective than if you don't have access to the text, but like you need to be using those strategies as well. For example, the highlighter example, Carrie gave it. She would highlight all the information. I've done this. And then you're like, holy crap, I have a page full of orange highlighter. Why didn't I choose the blue? Right? And you got it all over your hand and it's just not enjoyable. Or my computer's sitting in my textbook, otherwise I would show you. Or like you highlight everything in the textbook and then you're mad at yourself because you can't resell it, and like you don't even, like, you might as well have not like highlighted anything because it's all highlighted, right? You need to know how to do it before you need to know why and how. Otherwise, there's no point in using it. So that is my caution with some of these apps and forms of assistive technology. And it's not a good thing I'm running out of time. I'm so sorry for not better pacing, but I'm going to give you a quick overview. If you need to leave, that's totally fine. We'll continue recording, okay? I will not be offended, I promise. But we're going to go over them quite briefly. And again, I got these off the internet. And well, actually, a lot of them, I'll tell you, a lot of them, students mentioned that they use them, but then they're also the ones that are like highlighted on the internet, okay? So GoodNotes is a really popular one. I have a student that uses GoodNotes. It can be great. They use it on the iPad, the student that I'm working with. And they kind of use it to do the mind mapping and the free flow stuff. When I'm working with them in strategy sessions, they actually are writing on it to keep themselves focused and engaged. So they really like GoodNotes. So this is one that you can kind of look at. It's searchable. So that's really good if that's going to work for you. The student that I have uses it on an iPad. So, I think she said that it pairs to her device and all of her devices, and she seems to like it. And she's got a system where she can pull up the information and the notes in this organized fashion, and it's brilliant, and I'm in awe. Evernote is one. I don't know anyone using it, but you hear about it all the time, and I don't know if that's because I see it on the advertisements for all of the reels I watch on like strategies and stuff. The website makes it sound really good. Sounds very similar to GoodNotes. I'm sure they all, I mean, this is a competitive market. I'm sure they all have very similar features, and it's going to be about user preference. Lisa, feel free to correct me because this is more your area. But that's my understanding, is that they all kind of have a lot of the same stuff. And it's going to depend on preference.
Very much so. It's why does one person choose Chev versus somebody else choosing a Honda? It's just what you like. But yeah, Evernote was one of the first, so I think that's why it's still kind of running around out there.
Yeah, for sure. And there are tons of competing ones for sure. A lot of them have free 30 or 60-day trials, or sometimes 90-day trials. I mean, so if you don't have access to, purchasing it, you can definitely give it a go long enough to know if it's something that you're going to like. And yeah, you can take a picture of things on there. And so sometimes that's really good. And a common accommodation that I'm seeing students have for in-person classes is where they can take a picture of like the board and stuff, particularly for math, if the profs want to like write on the board. So something like this could be really good, I'm guessing. I don't know. Yeah, figure out what's going to work for you. OneNote. I don't often think of OneNote when we think of assistive technology because it's available to everybody, and that's great because that's what we want, I think, for assistive technology is we want it to be available for those that are going to need it or could benefit from it. You don't have to need a piece of technology for it to benefit you, okay? But if something that you're doing is working, why change it? Yeah. So OneNote, according to the internet, says that it's really good to kind of like tag information, mixed media. That's kind of what I got from it, but super common. I've actually never used OneNote, but tons of people use it. Lisa uses it, I think, right?
Yeah. Oh, I love it. You said that it was really the comments. You said the internet says, so I was just saying, and Lisa, because I am a huge fan.
Yeah, Lisa. Yeah.
I love it.
Good. And okay, that's awesome. So Lisa loves that, and I love Google. I love everything Google. Google. Everything I do is on Google because it works for my brain. Is that going to work for your brain? Maybe not. And that is very okay. All right. So figure out what's going to work for you. This is considered assistive technology. If you are using it in a way that's going to assist you and help remove some barriers, then that's great. Apple Notes. I'm not an Apple user. I'm a PC girl for sure. I have an Apple iPhone. But yeah. So I use my Apple Notes to like put down groceries, or if like I need to, I don't know, get some information at the store, whatever. Okay. Notion is one that I also had not heard of, but it came up everywhere when I was, it comes up all the time in ads on Instagram right now. And now that I just said it, everyone that has the phone in vicinity of my voice definitely is gonna now have the ads for Notion. It seems really cool. Out of all of these, if there was one I was most curious to play around with that I'm not familiar with, it was Notion. Yeah, so it is promoted by a lot of YouTubers. Yeah, for sure. So anyways, that's one you might want to check out. Okay, this one is fantastic. So I work with my learning coach. I work with some students that attend King's here in Edmonton. And this seems to be like the one that they're getting referred to. And so this is like an actual like note-taking service. And so Carrie and Lisa, it might be similar to like Chart kind of ish in where it's not captioning, but like it's giving you a transcript. So I guess like it's a paid service where they have a reporter that like logs in from the app or somehow, I don't know, does their technology magic and provides with a really clear transcription of the live lecture. But I also have had students specifically with online learning using it for videos and stuff. And so this is really cool, something you might want to check out. Quite pricey. So if it's something that you need for a disability related reason, then there's that and other options as well. But that's a really good one. This one I'm really familiar with. It's Glean. It used to be called Audio Notetaker. Glean is really good for in-person lectures. So a lot of the courses in AU don't have those live lecture components. If you ever have a live lecture component, I recommend looking up Glean. It's super cool. It's an app on your phone or on your computer or on a tablet. You can upload your lecture slides ahead of time, the ones that your instructors post onto Moodle and stuff. And then you can record the lecture with the slide as the instructor is speaking. And you can like annotate it as you go. And it's just, if it's used properly, it's beautiful. If you don't know how to use it, it's just distracting and annoying. But if you take the time to learn it, it can be a really beautiful tool. Okay, so that's for in-person. Some students do use it for online stuff as well, but it's more for like a live lecture kind of thing. Rocketbook. I think this is just an ad that's all over YouTube and Instagram right now. It seems overrated. It seems really expensive, but hey, don't go off my opinion. I'm just showing you what is out there. These are like reusable notebooks and planners where you like write on it and then you can like sync it to your device. That's kind of cool. I used one years ago. I can't remember what it was called, but I bought it at Staples. And when I was principal, I used to do like my staff meeting notes because, teachers didn't have computers all the time in the library. But so I used to do that and then it would like go to my computer. For me, it was more of a gimmick than it was worth, but for some people, this might be really helpful. So definitely you can check that out. And again, with something like the Rocketbook, you would be using the other note-taking strategies as like a template, right? Smart pens. I don't know if we're still recommending these to students too often. They can be helpful for some students. I think we're more advanced for a lot. But some students are still using them and finding them really helpful when they're taking their own notes and they're studying themselves. It might be something that's helpful. I'm noticing that psychologists are still recommending them for students with learning disabilities. I don't have a student that really loves it and uses it actively, but maybe they do and they're just not telling me. It doesn't really come up in conversation. Again, much like the Rocketbook kind of idea, I've tried it years ago and I liked it. Some of them like have a built-in camera. The one that I had would like read words, which could be really good if you're reading like more jargony books and you're going to need it just for like larger words. If you're going to need it to read information all the time, that's not going to be helpful. But this one particularly, it's more about like recording what you write and like pairing the sound with it. I don't know. So just some options out there. Okay. As with all of the sessions, I really want to encourage you to take a moment to reflect in your own way and to set a goal for what you can do within your own learning practice. I made a goal that's not perfect because none of them are going to be perfect, but it's a starting point for some people. Okay. So your goal might be to complete Psych 290 with an A+ or an A- or a B+ or just to pass, and that's just fine. Your short-term goal could be, like I'm going to utilize taking strategies to increase my comprehension of course content. That sounds like a great short-term goal. How are you going to meet it? Well, there's a few things that I'm going to do. I'm going to use the outline method on Google Docs when taking chapter notes. It's pretty specific. Let's give it a go. Or maybe I'm going to illustrate psychological theories using inspiration. I'm in a psych course. I think that's also a really good strategy. I'm also going to create some flow notes when listening to student presentations because when students present, I am completely off topic. Okay. I know that they don't have student presentations in Psych 290, but you get the point. Just go with me here. So creating that goal to embed the note taking. Okay. Lisa, you have a team member who uses the pen and loves it. That's so good. Yeah. I still
Actually the Rocketbook.
Oh, the Rocketbook.
Yeah. She uses it for everything. Loves it. We argue about it all the time.
Really?
I like Remarkable. Okay. Yeah. I prefer the That's Remarkable. Awesome. She's all about that Rocketbook.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. See, what's going to work for one might not work for everybody. It might. And I've never tried it. So that's fun. Okay, cool. Perhaps if like educators had unlimited budgets to try all these fun things, then we could have,
Would not be nice.
right? Okay, so takeaway task, just building off, I'm just trying to give you some structure. I know not all of you are going to do this, and you know what? That's okay. You're doing what you can do. But remember, we're going to remember information if we don't review it, okay? But there's no test. You don't have to study. You could even just pick one thing. You could save it. And for when you need to be taking notes or whatever, try a different strategy. I just challenge you, okay? Think about what's working well for you. Think about what's not working so well and could use a little bit of a tweak. That's what you need to focus on. And just like give it a go. Just try, get creative, have fun. And if you need some more tailored, specific support, reach out to the resources around you because there's tons of support. And we can kind of, hopefully, you can feel a little bit more right to use note-taking systems and strategies and scaffolds. Remember, all of the strategies we talked about today are scaffolds to taking notes. Notes are notes. At the end of the day, the purpose of the note is to help you learn material and to use those notes, therefore, as a tool to help you learn material so you can demonstrate that knowledge. Okay, well, not so you can, but one of the effects is so you can demonstrate that knowledge. So the structure, the form does not matter if it's working for you. Time-wise, energy-wise, content-wise, all of that. Okay, that's one big. There we go. That's note-taking. And now things are getting messy, guys, because like we're going to do exam prep and writing stuff next week. And that's a lot of information. And I'm having a hard time compressing it all and compacting it and picking out what's most important. And then we're going to talk about reading and it all embeds together. And then there's writing, which also kind of embeds too for like essays and stuff. So yeah, I'm really excited. Okay. I just rambled at you for just over an hour. If you have any questions, now is your time. I'd be happy to help out.
A jam-packed session. Fantastic. Yeah, let's go to the chat and let's go ahead and you can use your microphones as well.
Yeah, feel free to jump in too. Hey, I know it can be daunting and now you're probably like, oh crap, someone has to ask a question. You have to have a question and you might not have a question. Yeah, even just reflecting on like, even if sometimes it's hard to reflect on like something that you could change in your practice. But you could even like, this is what I often do. If I want to reflect on something in my own life, I try and like go out of myself and like look at my life or an aspect of my life from someone else's perspective. And so, yes, a lot about what I'm showing you, I learned as a student, but it's also what I'm seeing from people not doing right. And so if someone's not doing really well, it's coming up with something to help them, that scaffold, right? That cane if you need it. Carrie, what if you can't write notes while also listening? That's okay. Some people can't. What you can do is record. Well, actually, if you're in like a lecture, you could record the lecture and go back afterwards. Yeah, Carries are your best friend. Carrie, recorders are your best friend. The strategy, like the printing of the lecture notes or even just pulling it up digitally and it like drawing boxes or underlying on it, it can really help you that way as well. So that's really good. If you have a language-based learning disorder, it's quite likely that you will struggle to write notes. And that's okay. There's different ways that you can do it. Recording is great. And then, like I said, the printing of the notes and the boxing is really helpful as well. Just not about my son again, but I'll make it about my son. Finals are coming up. He's in grade 7. He thinks it's a big deal. I know it's not really that important. Don't tell him I said that. But I was trying to help him like study for his science exam from the PowerPoints. And I'm like, this is brutal. Like there is not enough meaning from this PowerPoint. So then I had to like show him some of those strategies of like, sometimes you're going to get the notes from, this is where I'm making the connection. Sorry. The connection of using the pre-provided notes from the instructor. Okay. You need to make your own meaning from those notes. And that's what we're doing when we're drawing boxes, when we're writing in the columns, when we're underlining stuff. Okay. You need to make your own meaning from those notes. If that means you need to like put a link to some YouTube that's going to be helpful to kind of clarify the content, then that's what you need to do. If that means that you need to go back through the textbook and like find where it like matches up and fill in the information, if you need to like put in your own vocabulary words because the ones that they're using are too unfamiliar to you, that's fine. You need to do that in order to make that accessible for you. Okay, so that's kind of how that goes for sure. And so that also links to don't just print off the notes from the prof and use that as a study tool, because it's not your own. That's like going to trivial pursuit, those like stacks you can buy at Winners or the bookstore of like the trivia. That's like reading the trivia and like studying from the trivia. You need some context sometimes in order to help make it meaningful for you, right? So making it meaningful, you're welcome, Mallory, is really important. Okay. Yeah.
That's a really good point, because I can also think when I would go to school, I would just type out stuff and then make it smaller version, make a smaller version, make a smaller version. And it was always, what am I going to forget? So that's what my notes became, is what I know I'm going to forget.
Right. When using those notes as a study tool, right, Carrie? So, the instructors that are like, you can bring in one piece of paper and this is what you have. I should make a little, a reel, an Instagram reel. It's my challenge. I'm not going to, but so instructors will say you can bring in one piece of paper. That's it. And we've got the student that doesn't come with a piece of paper. We got a student that comes with stuff like chicken scratched all over it and you can barely read it and like they don't use the space wisely. And then you have the keener that comes with the really typed up little boxes on both sides and their magnifying glass. And they're like, I got the whole textbook on this paper. Profs don't design that activity for you to like cheat the system or think you're cheating the system. You're really just cheating yourself. They design the activity for you to pare down essential information, and they're letting you bring in a scaffold for recall. That's what they're doing. So we're going to talk about my most favorite strategy, which is the concept page, aka the cheat sheet, but we can't call it that in post-secondary because that would be unethical. But we're going to talk about imagine you can bring in one piece of paper and you can write anything on it. What would you have on it? Well, it's not going to be all of the information in the chapter. It's going to be the information you know the least, or you're the least confident in. And so as you're studying, sneak peek to next week, as you're studying, you might start out with 4 pages or 5 pages. But then as you're quizzing yourself and you're engaging with the material and you're demonstrating mastery over the concepts, you're eliminating page because that information is no longer essential because you got it. And eventually you're going to come down to 1 page of the big bam. This is the stuff I need to know and I'm struggling to remember, or it's really complex, or it's really hard. And then we get into different strategies about how do you visualize that on the page. Okay, so you don't need to come next week now. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so yeah, I don't know how we started talking about that, but okay.
Right, I distracted us.
That's
because
okay.
that was my note-taking strategy. What do I think I'm going to forget, when really I should have known I was going to forget 60% anyway.
Yeah, that's
awesome. Good. Thank you so much, Deanna, once again. I'm going to stop the recording now, but I just wanted to say, hey, that was awesome. Thank you so much. We'll continue with questions if you have a couple more minutes.
Yeah, for sure. I have a couple minutes. So if anybody has any more questions, feel free to reach out. If you're not comfortable, you can always email me. I can't promise I'll get back to you right away, but I will get back to you in somewhat timely fashion.